we will, there you go, right there. We'll be sending this out afterwards as well. So my name is Sarah Tober. I'm the Deputy Director here at La Plata Economic Development Alliance. And this is our Housing Catalyst Fund Round 2 Q&A webinar. So we'll go ahead and I'll jump into the first two slides, Jen, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jen Lopez. So just kind of a little bit of an overhead of what the Housing Catalyst Fund is. The Economic Development Alliance, and Jen will talk more about this, commissioned a study with the help of the county on workforce housing last year called the Workforce Housing Investment Strategy. And it's a 3-year plan. And the Housing Catalyst Fund is one of those 6 prongs that were identified in that plan. One of the reasons I'm really excited about the work we're doing here at the Alliance is we've really started to craft a workforce housing program around the investment strategy, around the Housing Catalyst Fund, with our work with the Regional Housing Alliance of La Plata County, and our Renters Assistance Program with our partner for Southwest Bank. So to talk a little bit about the Housing Catalyst Fund, it is a public-private partnership to create seed funding to support below-market housing development in La Plata County. So to date, we've raised about $650,000, and our first round closed at the beginning of this summer, and we funded 4 projects at about $180,000. We're really excited because that will mean about 350 new workforce housing units coming into La Plata County. So this pre-development fund is providing grant funds to help projects move through feasibility. And this really connects us with the projects in La Plata County that make the most sense for workforce housing. And we're able to utilize those public-private relationships to help try to expedite these processes and try to help identify funding sources for a lot of these projects as well. So this Catalyst Fund is based on other pre-development funds. And this is why we're so lucky to have our partner Project Moxie, Jen Lopez, here to help guide us through that process. This is not her first Catalyst Fund, and hopefully will not be her last, but we were able to utilize all of these best practices informing our Housing Catalyst Fund here in La Plata County because of Jen's work. So again, it came from that housing investment strategy, and also Project Moxie was a part of creating that strategy for us as well. So the Economic Development Alliance, we manage the program and we continue to fundraise for the Catalyst Fund. We are in round 2 right now, and we anticipate having potentially round 3 and round 4, depending on our fundraising efforts. And so the next slide just kind of demonstrates again, the Alliance and our workforce housing program, the kind of work we're doing here, and the staff that we have to support it. Sarah Schwartz was recently added to our staff. She's the new housing strategy manager here at the Alliance. We're so excited to have her. She comes to us by Summit County, where she was in housing there for the past few years, and she worked with short-term rentals. So we're excited to be adding to our team and to more of our resources here at the Alliance. So without any further ado, I will turn this over to Jen Lopez, the brain behind this Catalyst Fund.
Sarah, thank you for queuing it up so beautifully. It's so much fun to be launching round 2. So I am Jen Lopez. A lot of people locally know me, but we have some folks who are not from the area. So I'll just do a quick introduction. So I have a small consulting firm called Project Moxie. We're based in Durango. I've been doing affordable housing work for 23 years, and our company primarily works in Colorado and New Mexico. We're always excited when we can do more work in our own backyard. So again, this has been a great partnership with Economic Alliance. Sarah Manji is on with us today and does a lot of project management work with us. And then we have another consultant named Donna Morse, who is expert in federal and state resources. We also have Luis on today, Snodgrass, who's helping us with communications support. We're going to touch a little bit more on the workforce housing investment strategy because it frames the Catalyst Fund. And before I do that, though, I do want to do a quick shout out and thank you to all the original investors in the fund. I think it was the city and the county. And again, I think Sarah and Mike, gotta add that extra Sarah, have been incredible at fundraising for this program. So again, just really great to be partnered with you all, and you're so good at fundraising. So the plan was created, it took us about 15 months, and it was building on a needs assessment that was done regionally. And needs assessments always, say, we need thousands of units and things like that. But what we do is we say, what's actually viable? So the strategy really focuses on what different partners in the community are working on, what the possible funding sources could be for housing. We modeled the average gaps per unit to understand how much it would cost to build all the different types of housing we wanted to build. And we captured the pipeline. We say pipeline a lot. We mean housing development pipeline or preservation pipeline. And there was quite a bit of activity when we were working on this a year and a half ago. And then looking for ways that we can leverage public funds as efficiently and private funds with the new state funding coming out. And so, again, this is on the website, Economic Development Alliance website. We are going to do an update to this plan this fall, primarily because we've had some changes with interest rates and had changes with some funding sources, meaning there's more funding available. We did this before Prop 123 was passed, so we want to do an adjustment. Again, key strategies in the plan, really focusing on rental housing, both tax credit and below market rental housing. We really have a huge need for sale housing opportunities. The last couple of years, the product just hasn't been there. And so, we're excited for Bayfield and Ignacio and some of our private partners who are really focusing on building that for sale, units. And then we also are working on preserving workforce housing and mobile home parks. We've got 3 parks locally that are going through preservation right now, which is really exciting. And then another key strategy that we'll be working with RHA on this year and next is really how do we create a dedicated local housing fund for the region moving forward. We've learned over the last couple of years, education and advocacy is always got to be going on, and it is happening. And then love the work and the conversations happening with employers in this region. They're teaching me a lot about how we think about strategy with housing. And then finally, we called out the Catalyst Fund as a primary strategy to move things forward. A few other things from the process. It's always been hard to build in La Plata County for a number of reasons, but really post-COVID, the gaps have just exponentially increased. We've never seen pricing like this before in our community. And so what it really requires is a lot of creativity and partnership and subsidizing projects from land, infrastructure to construction and then financing. So we're using all the tools to get to where we need to go with these different projects. And again, these numbers are probably higher now, but when we did the plan a year and a half ago, we saw gaps for rental housing from 45,000 and up. And then for sale gaps were at least 200,000. So those are big gaps. Again, not to scare, but to be realistic about how we need to partner and make sure that we can fill those gaps together. Some innovations in the plan. We did a lot of listening and interviewing. And one of the ideas that we hope will really start to move forward next year is coming up with one catalytic project in the region where we can open up development and get hundreds of units. And so that's still in the works. I think the RHA is looking at some different options there, but it's a recognition that there's only so much infill development available in Durango, and we don't want to push our development into the county. So how do we work together? Or also, how does Bayfield work with the county and Ignacio? So just being more thoughtful about those longer term land development strategies for housing. Few other things that were really exciting when we wrote the plan, and I know we've got some of our friends from the mobile home parks here with us today, but preservation is a huge need, whether it's rental development or mobile home parks. And again, we're really fortunate to have so much resident leadership in this community and willing investors like Local First, La Plata County, First Southwest Bank, in our state. And so that was called out as a strategy that needs to be worked on and continued in the 3-year strategy. We also had Fort Lewis step up a couple years ago, and they created an employer strategy, and we've been implementing that slowly over the last year and a half. And again, all of these strategies are really trying to tackle the cost of production. And so modular came up over and over again in interviews, and it's exciting to know that we are seeing some modular construction come to the region. So a little bit about the Catalyst Fund process. I do tend to talk fast. I apologize. I promise that we will do a Q&A at the end of the webinar. At any time, you are also welcome to put your questions in the chat, but this is fairly informal and you can unmute and just ask your questions. We've got about 7 or 8 slides on the Catalyst Fund. So again, the thought here when we created this fund was there was a lot of ideas and possible projects within the region, and we wanted to help these projects move forward. In order to move forward, most of them had questions around, is my site feasible? Am I in the right location? Do the costs work? These are really early due diligence questions. And so, and the folks that were bringing the projects forward varied from nonprofits to for-profits to public entities. And so we said, look, we want to help all of these different entities be able to bring their ideas forward, and let's see which ones are ready to go so we can help them get funded. We were also very intentional in queuing up for new state funds. So we also said, we don't want to be left behind. This is going to be a competitive process at the state level, and let's help our community queue up our projects. Again, initial funding from City of Durango, La Plata County, amazing. And then the fund, what we do, it's a pretty straightforward letter of intent. And it's a 4 to 5 page application that's on the Economic Development Alliance website. If you have initial numbers and concepts, it really only takes 4 or 5 hours to submit it. If you don't have those things, it's going to take you longer. But it's not a really intensive application process. But we solicit those through this letter of interest process. And then we have a steering committee and with folks from the local governments and investors and CHAFA, et cetera, because we need a lot of brains around these projects. Every project has an interesting twist to it. So that group really looks at the projects, and then we score them based on readiness to proceed. And we'll talk about what readiness to proceed means in a future slide. And then folks are asking for different amounts, and we'll talk about what those options are. And then, yeah. So it's we meet and we score and we make some funding decisions. And then the funds, what can you use funds for? So it's a grant, and the grants range from 25 to 75,000. And sorry, I hope you can't hear the background. I've got construction in the background, which is ironic. Anyway, the grants range from 25 to 75,000, and the funds can be used for typical pre-development activities, which include feasibility studies, environmental studies, engineering studies, early architectural design, market studies, legal fees, soil, site prep, surveys, consultants. So all of these things we find are ways to move projects out of concept and down the road of feasibility. I'm going to go back to this one. I think what we learned from the last round is be really specific how you want to use the funds. So we'll be asking for line item pre-development budgets. So the more specific you can be on the use of the funds and the timeline for using the funds, the easier it is for us to understand, and the more competitive your LOI will be. Again, back to eligible applicants. So you can be a nonprofit, you can be a private developer, you can be a public agency. In your application, we want to see that somebody on your team has direct housing experience, or you're using a housing consultant. Again, that's because we want projects that are the most ready to move forward and get prepared for state funds. So you got to have that development team. Also, pre-development work is risky. This is a reason that a lot of traditional housing funders don't fund pre-development. The way that we mitigate risk for the program is through that development team. So the 2 greatest risks in pre-development is the development team, isn't experienced in the projects, or your site, right? So those are the 2 things we're really going to look at. We also want to make sure that the teams are in good standing with state or local governments. And then projects that apply for funds need to be willing to commit a percentage of the units in their project to below market housing. This is easy for federal programs like the tax credit program. This gets a little more creative if a project comes in and they're not using state or federal subsidies and they're working with the City of Durango on fair share, things like that. So again, we need to have some commitment of below market housing, and we'll talk about what that means and that definition in a minute. Again, clearly define your scope of funding, and then show us that you're ready with the feasibility work that you're asking for funds for. Below market housing, what do we mean? So below market housing is defined as housing that can be delivered to local community members at the following prices. So for rental housing, we're looking to deliver new rental units that provide affordable rents to households earning less than 140% of area median income. And then for sale housing, we're looking for units that can deliver pricing for households less than 160% of area median income. On the on the Catalyst Fund website, on the Economic Development Alliance website, there is a chart. So you can go see that, but we're talking about households, that make over 100,000 a year, right? So we have gaps below that, but we have gaps above that. So feel free to go to the website, click and see what we mean by those rent levels and those prices. All affordability calculations are updated every year, and we follow the guidelines of the Homes Fund. The Homes Fund, if you're not aware, is a local CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, that does a number of mortgage programs. And so we always want to align the new initiatives with their programs and their funding. We also do our best to align with the city's Fair Share program, which is an inclusionary zoning program. And then all rental affordability calculations, we really follow the Colorado Housing Finance Authority guidelines. Again, you can ask for grants ranging from 25 to 75,000. If you're awarded, the grant agreement will require that applicants provide quarterly updates on activities. So if you said you're doing a market study, an engineering study, and entitlement work, you would just let us know how those things are going. There are going to be times where you do these activities and you realize that your project's not feasible. We know that, and you just let us know, right? We did the things and we can't move forward. And then for the projects that do those pre-development activities and can move forward, we'll want to understand what that looks like, what your timeline is, et cetera. Selected projects may also receive some technical assistance from Project Moxie. We learned a lot about that process in phase one. And I have a slide on it, so I'll just wait till we get there. But one of the biggest challenges right now, I think, around designing workforce housing projects has been the amount of uncertainty around new state programs. So as the state programs get better defined, it becomes easier for the team to provide technical assistance, and we'll talk about what we mean there in a second. So round 2 will be open until Halloween. Questions related to the Catalyst Fund can be directed to Sarah Schwartz. This is Sarah's email. And then again, there's a fabulous landing page for this program, and we invite you to look directly on the website. A lot of things get answered there. Again, how are we tracking success for this program? Again, pre-development's risky. Some projects will not move forward, but we'll be tracking everybody who's funded by, did they do what they said they were going to do in terms of the pre-development activities? And then if they are moving forward, how many units of housing are they creating? How much money was leveraged, and who are they serving with their project? Perhaps they're doing something that's got a modular component, or it's innovative, or it's got green features. We want to know those things too. And then we just want to share a few of the lessons from the funding round 1, which was our pilot round. So again, these projects, when they get pre-development from the Catalyst Fund, the intent is to get these projects farther along so we know that they're feasible or not, and then start preparing them for the large investments that they're going to need to be developed. So whether it's getting state funds or bank funds, probably both, right? So we're starting to realize the importance of letting applicants know what those larger funding sources are looking for. One thing that came up over and over again in the first round was market studies. So a lot of times people get confused between a needs assessment and a market study. Again, a needs assessment will say, we have 7,000 households in the region paying too much for rental housing, and that tells us something about, the need for more rental housing. A market study says if you build 40 units in Ignacio, we're going to use Ignacio, 49 units in Ignacio, and they're rent and for sale, this is what they need to look like, this is the size, and this is the pricing in order for folks to be interested in purchasing those units, right? And so even if you don't have any doubts that there's demand for your product, all the funding sources are going to want to see that. So we're trying to get ahead of that a little bit. So if you have done a market study, that's really helpful coming into the LOI process. Most people have not, so you can ask for us to help pay for that market study. So just calling that out. And then we saw a lot of this as well, land development versus vertical development, right? So land development, piece of land, going to develop it. If you're doing land development, we're going to want to understand your land development pro forma, as well as at least some basic assumptions about your vertical project. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but we had the majority of our round one was land development. And so we ended up going back and trying to get clarification on assumptions with the housing units that people were going to build. Here's the great news. This is a pretty fluid process. You do the best you can with that LOI, but we do have a cure period. So when the LOIs come in, we review them. If we have questions for you all, we're going to come back. We're going to ask questions. You're going to have time to answer those questions. Last round, we had questions for the project. So again, you do the best you can on the application, but don't be afraid, and we'll come back if we have additional questions. And then state funding is really robust. It's also very competitive, and it's also only going to gap your project, right? State funds are not going to drive the project. And so just want to, you should have some pretty good assumptions about, what your loan amounts, your interest rates, your construction, right? What are all the other financing sources that you're going to use to get to the place where the state can gap the final piece for you? So state funding, it has been a crazy year, good, bad, and tough. What we learned in 2023 with state funds is there was a number of new programs. A lot of you applied coming end of last year up until February. We had a lot of American Rescue Plan Act one-time funding. That funding came and went. And then starting in July, we've all been pivoting to get ready for Proposition 123 funding. I'm so proud of this region. Everybody in this La Plata County opted in for Prop 123 funds, which is fantastic. But we're still really learning what those funds can be used for and what the rules of those funds are. Applications that were the most successful in this LOI process had a experienced development team, and they had sites that were ready to go, or they were really clear on what needed to happen to get their site ready to go, right? And so when I say full development team, again, it's the developer, there's a developer or a development consultant. That's a thing you can ask for as well. Maybe you've got all the elements of a team, but not a consultant. You can ask for consultant support. You've got a design person, you've got the contractor, things like that. And then be clear in your LOI. Oh, local match. Sorry, local match is huge. So a couple years ago, because we're a rural area of the state, match requirements, we have very light match requirements on traditional state funds. But as we saw these new programs roll out of Department of Local Affairs and with Proposition 123, match became essential and it became a requirement. And so we're starting to try to tease that out at this early stage. So, how do you think you'll be able to get local match funds? And match funds can come from government, it can come from private, right? There's a lot of ways to get match funds, but that's going to be critical moving forward with these competitive state programs. And then finally, be clear on what you are trying to do and with who. And then if you're not from the area, make sure that you work with some of the local groups that provide technical assistance or run programs like the Homes Fund, and make sure that your program is aligning with what's already in place. A couple more questions. Durango has a fair share ordinance, which is requiring resources to offset the need for workforce housing. Eva Henson, who's on this committee and on the RHA board and a leader in our community, is the person you want to reach out to if you have a Durango project and you haven't talked to her yet, because we're going to want to see in the LOI how you're contemplating working with the fair share ordinance, or maybe, just how that's going to look, because it does impact your feasibility. Finally, the team is going to be pivoting in the next few weeks to put together an educational series. So we, as I said, had waited with the technical assistance all summer and had a number of conversations and realized that most of the first group of grant recipients had the same questions around state funds. So we're going to create an educational series this fall that's going to focus on the nuts and bolts of how you do workforce housing development in 2023. with interest rates that are high, and all the things that are making it a really challenging time to develop, and a really important time to develop. We will be announcing the dates for these webinars, but they're typically going to happen on Fridays, and we're going to do them around lunchtime. And so we'll start those in early November. All right, I'm going to stop sharing so we can see everyone, and would love to take questions. I see that there's some questions in the chat, so maybe we'll look at those real quick. Is a mobile home park rental or for sale? Depends. I think your feasibility needs to tell us, are you working on the park as a whole and infrastructure? Or are you trying to do a program where you're replacing units? And you might be both. So again, I think just be really clear what the scope of work is that you're seeking funds for, and then we can go from there. Does that help, Lindy?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate all this. So the main thing that we were going to seek funds for was infrastructure, engineering for the infrastructure. And as you're talking, I'm realizing, well, we also have, so we need water and sewer and then roads, but also we have some retaining walls that need to be redone that we're getting an engineer involved with, and we'll need soil samples. And so maybe that would be part of it too. In our park, of course, people own their homes and then they pay lot rent. So I just wanted to be clear on what we fell under.
You're a resident-owned community, so again, you're kind of a unicorn. I mean, in my mind, I don't know, you tell us, but you're going to check all the boxes. I think what's going to be hard for your project, and you're already articulating that, is like, what's the progress and next steps to get to where you understand the full cost of replacing the infrastructure or whatever it is that you're doing with your park.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lindy. Are there other questions?
Yeah, hey, how are you?
Good. How
I
are
was
you?
wondering if you can kind of dive into local match a little bit more and just kind of explain it, because I'm not sure if I really know what you meant by local match.
You bet. That's a great question. So it's a contribution to the project that comes locally, right? So the state, has finite resources, and they're going to want to see that there's some resource coming locally. So some of the matches we saw in the last round was like land from the local government is a common match, right? You might see a developer who's already invested $2 million. That would be a match. So it's something you can monetize that's coming from a local source to show that there's skin in the game locally, and that you're trying to minimize your ask to the state because of the competitiveness of those funds. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's not a requirement. It's just like is that like a lesson learned kind of thing from Fund One?
It's a lesson learned.
Got it.
Like, you don't have to have match for us per se, but as we want to position you to be competitive for state funds, we want you thinking about it now, because we're just seeing a lot of match requirements popping up more strongly. And again, I think this is really Governor Polis. We've seen that with a lot of legislation, and I get it. Like, there's limited funds, so we've got to have some local match stuff happening.
And then I guess I have one more question.
Sure.
On one of the slides, you said site ready to go, and I'm just kind of wondering if you could be a little bit more specific in terms of what you mean by that, like site plan approval, just having closed on the land, are you 100% CDs? What do you yeah.
That's a good question. Who are you with, Nicholas?
I'm with BLD Group.
Oh, okay. I don't know you, but thank you. So readiness is, you got to have site control. So you don't have to close, but you have to have site control, right? Because we don't want to invest if you don't have site control. We want to understand where you're at in the entitlement process. So if, I think somewhere in the application, it says readiness to proceed, you can get your entitlements done in 12 months, 18 months, something like that. So we understand that you're not going to have all this stuff done. That's the whole reason we offer pre-development, right? So I think just articulate as clearly as possible where you're at in the process. That's really what we need.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does that help?
Mhm.
Okay. Great. Do we have any other questions? Karen, I'm not going to talk about inclusionary zoning or fair share right now, just because I'm not an expert in what's happening right now with the program. But I highly recommend, thank you. I know there's a lot of interest in it. And again, if you can plug in with Eva's process, that's amazing. Are there any other questions? Don't be shy.
Yes, I have a question. You said 4 projects were awarded. How many projects applied?
Ooh, good question. I think it was 5. So most of them were awarded. The other thing that was really, I think, inspiring about the first round is we were able to do geographical diversity. And I don't know, Sarah, so Bayfield, Ignacio, Durango, like we had nice diversity across the region. Sarah, Schwartz, do you want to mention anything?
I am still learning more about this, but I do know we had 5 applicants in the last round, and then the new one is available. I'm not sure if we've had any applicants yet, but it does seem like the first round was really successful with a variety of projects.
Thanks, Sarah. Maybe a couple other lessons learned since we have some new folks on. One other thing we saw as a trend in the first round was folks being confused between pre-development funding and gap funding. Here's the difference, right? Gap funding is like millions of dollars, right? It's money to actually implement your project and bring the cost down so you can deliver a below market product. Pre-development is really almost always third-party consultants providing studies to tell you whether the thing you want to do is feasible. So again, a lot of folks use their funds for feasibility engineering, a lot of engineering, some market studies. Those were big ones. Maybe a traffic study. Some were trying to get development support, housing development support. Thank you, Katie Sickles. Good to see you. And again, anyway, I hope that's helpful. And then we had the one that didn't get funded was asking for gap. So that's why I brought that up. They were asking for a lot more money and it was the wrong use and things like that. Thank you, Sarah Tober. So this will be competitive. Again, give us as much information as you possibly can. We expect you to have issues with the project. That's why you're coming to us. Let us know, right? Like, hey, I've got this piece of land. Here's what my challenge is. That's why I need pre-development funding to see if I can get over this challenge, whether it's an entitlement issue, an engineering issue, a market issue, a product issue, a price point issue. Again, that's what pre-development funds are for. So you don't have to have a perfect project by any means. Just again, articulate who you're trying to serve, how you're trying to serve them, and the questions you're trying to answer with pre-development money. Are there any other questions?
Are you requiring any kind of deed restriction or guaranteed affordability with any of the units?
Well, that's a great question. I think so. I mean, we're trying to hit, so I guess this is the way I would answer it. When you, in your application, tell us how you're going to meet the 25% below market. If you're going to meet that by using federal and state funds, they will require it. We will just follow their requirement. We are not going to do any heavy lifting or regulation stuff. We're just trying to get your project going. Where it gets challenging is if you're not using federal or state money and you're doing something creative or with fair share, then you're going to have to tell us how it's going to be restricted over time. We don't have rules about that. So for instance, again, I think Bayfield Ignacio have been playing with this quite a bit. You could use a second mortgage to capture the discount with your homes. You could use a deed restriction, but you'll tell us. We don't have a hard requirement, except for that it does have to be affordable over time. Great question. Are there any other questions?
I'll follow up. What do you mean by affordable over time?
So Tim, what we've normally done is a second mortgage, right? So it can be a second mortgage, it can be a land use regulatory agreement, it can be a deed restriction, but we are not mandating that tool, we're asking you to tell us how it would work. So again, like with your projects in Three Springs that are tax credits, that's easy, right? You're following the federal programs and the state requirements through a land use regulatory agreement. If you're doing something creative, we'll work with you on how to set it up, but that's where it gets a little more challenging. If we're not following a federal state program, we've got to come to an agreement on how to do that. So if I have a magic wand, I would recommend you use one of the existing program affordability tools we already use in the community. So again, we use second mortgages all the time. So if you're doing a for sale product, you could work with Lease at the Homes Fund to capture the difference with a second mortgage. We've got the infrastructure for that. If you're doing rental housing, tax credits, we do Allura. If you're doing a workforce rental housing project, we would probably mimic the Allura's with the tax credit, but not make it as robust because there's not as much funding. So I'm getting off track here. Tim, you just want to tell us, are you going to follow a state or federal program, or are you trying to be creative, and then we'll probably have to work with you on it? Did that answer your question?
It tells me where I gotta go. One of the things that we've been looking at is, can we bring on a rental product, hold it for 10 years, and then sell it individual units?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think we'll have to make, if you come into the fund, we'll just figure out what that looks like. We don't want to stymie the creativity of it. And again, we're not going to ask you to make something affordable if there's not funding to make it affordable. Does that make sense? So it's not like, I mean, this pre-development fund's a nice little help, but it depends on how you're envisioning funding the project. That's really what's going to decide what kind of affordability the project can actually sustain. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. But the concept
I have
of,
one more.
oh, one more. The concept of rental to ownership is, I think, really important and interesting. So I would love to see you all try to do that. And I think we'd be very supportive. Thank you. Sorry.
I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
So of the 4 that got approved in Fund 1, how many went the fair share route and how many did the minimum of 25% workforce?
I think the only one that was Durango was Ken Trujillo's project. So there was only one, I believe, that was Durango. Am I getting that right? No, there must have been 200.
Dale Nailers.
Thank you. And I think Dale is still working through that. So one of the Durango applicants is working with the city of Durango. So they already had sort of an agreement because they're getting land. So that was not driven by fair share as much as it was a land acquisition with the city. And so, you know, they're on their way. And then I know Dale Neller, the other project, is working through the fair share piece now.
Got it.
Are there other questions? Saratoga, are you back on with us? That's right. Sarah Schwartz, I wonder if we need to close out. Do you want to have any final last words? This was great. This will be posted on the website. Again, reach out to Sarah Schwartz if you have questions. And again, just give us the best information you have and we'll have questions. We'll come back to you. It's kind of an iterative, creative, grassroots process. And we're excited that there's this much interest in the next round.
Yeah, everything is up on our website and you can definitely direct any questions towards me. The application is live on there. So yeah, definitely reach out if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.